Twilight Velvet comes home drunk and gets in the wrong bed by Violently Irrelevant. Chapter 2, or technically Chapter 1, because I dubbed the first one Chapter 0 because I'm an edgelord. Chapter 2, all things scientific. Author's note. Couldn't leave it where I left it originally. I had to include some more silly, sexy shenanigans. Man, I love that fucking word. What are you up to? Shenanigans. The situation by the breakfast table is tense, to say the least. Twilight Velvet is attempting to busy herself around the large kitchen while Anon is simply staring at his sandwich. Twilight Sparkle is enthusiastically following every little motion with inquisitive eyes, as if last night's activity would bleed over into the current time and change something. Mercifully enough for both Velvet and Anon, Nightlight had to rush off on some urgent magic business. Twilight Sparkle tilts her head to the side and exhales audibly as her mother cleans the same spot on the countertop for the third time. Mom? Mom? Mom! No answer. Velvet doesn't even look in her direction. Twilight Sparkle huffs and looks to Anon. He actually looks up from his sandwich with an awkward glare. You can't stonewall me like this. I already agreed not to ask for Dad's input. Anon nods slowly. He cannot tell if Twilight Sparkle is genuinely ignorant to the fact that he had sex with her mother, or if she is prying for other reasons. Sure, it's all science this, science that with her. That's part of her appeal, though, her blissful ignorance mixed with scary intellect. Anon did not mean to sleep with her mother. He meant to sleep with her. He thought he had been blessed when Velvet crawled into his bed. He even spoke her name. He remembers that much. Of course, later realizing that Twilight would obviously apply to both mares. Flashes of Velvet's curvy body perforates his mind. He cannot help but to measure Twilight Sparkle up. How did he ever mistake her mother for her? Sure, they're exactly the same height, and both have some meat on them, but Velvet has nearly double the bust and definitely more than double the hips. Twilight Sparkle is incredibly tight, though. He can only imagine what Velvet looked like in her youth. Twilight Sparkle snaps him out of his meditative boobs and butts trance by leaning forward over the table. It takes him a good few seconds to look up from her sweater-clad breasts as they are pressed against the wood. Her face bears a mix of anger and inquisitiveness. Come on, Anon, give me some data. Explain to me the differences between a human mare and an equestrian one. Anon blinks slowly. How is he ever going to get a clear mind with all these beautiful women around? Well, first up, our mares are called women, and I can't say that they're much different from you mares. He feels dumb. He is entirely certain he looks dumb, too. He does not know what Twilight Sparkle once explained. He does not know her views on sex. She said cuddle, but he knows that is something else around here than back home. Perhaps she simply meant sex. Then her reaction to him fucking her mom was rather blasé. He sees no way out of this situation. Sparkle is watching him intently, waiting for him to continue. I mean, on the subject of cuddling, I think it means something different here than in my world. Sparkle shines up. She has already begun taking notes with some magical floating quill. Well, how would you compare a typical human cuddling to the one you had with Mom? As Sparkle finishes her sentence, a light clattering of dropped kitchenware and hurried steps fill the room. Velvet has made a hasty retreat. Anon watches her disappear out of the room before looking back to Twilight Sparkle. For some kind of reference, how does a typical pony cuddle usually work? Twilight looks a bit taken back, as if she was expecting him to know every detail of the word and action alike. Her mild confusion does not last long. She sets her elbows on the table and looks him in the eyes as she keeps leaning on the table. When two ponies like each other very much, Anon's expression is a dead stare. Is she going to explain the birds and the bees to him at this point of this maddening subject? Perhaps she has a different point, only that the explanation sounds all too familiar. They get very close to each other, hug, kiss, and caress each other. That's cuddling. Anon nods slowly. That did not help at all. A cuddle is a cuddle, it seems. He still has no clue if she even knows she has reproductive organs. She is of age enough to have explored said organs. She is of age enough to know where babies come from. For goodness sakes, she's packing sweater meat enough for a milkman to fall over. So, why do you think I, cuddled your mother? Twilight shrugs slightly. I guess you have been enjoying staying here the past months? I don't know much about your kind, but you are affectionate, and you are a stallion. Man, I think it was. You know, you have needs just like everyone else. There it is. That mind-rackingly impossible to crack blissful ignorance she just radiates. She knows about desire, but she's entirely overlooking the fact that he rather obviously filled her mom with cum. So, you think I hugged and petted your mother because I like it here? Twilight gives him a certain glance. No, silly. That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. How you work, what makes you tick. Isn't she just twisting things around now? Is it like she's playing with him without him knowing it? She sounds quite happy as she continues. Mom is obviously quite taken with you. You must be an excellent cuddle partner. Anon swallows hard. Is this his way in? The path to what he wants? The situation cannot get any more awkward and muddled. Might as well go for it. Seize the moment. Perhaps not in the smoothest fashion, but one who dares also wins, right? Well, I mean, I could show you. We could experiment? Twilight Sparkle looks a bit contemplative for a short moment, then shines up, ideas and enthusiasm mingling in her expression. She stands up in a hasty move, her chair clattering to the floor behind her. She does not even seem to notice. Her magical notepad scribbles furiously for a moment, then stops. She eyes Anon up and down, similar to what he did earlier, without her knowledge. A few more notes, then she smiles for him. We could, sofa? No, we need to recreate the original environment. A bed! She looks completely caught up in the moment. She starts walking off towards the stairs. It's not long before she looks over her shoulder to him. Well, come along then. We'll use my bed. Anon watches her in some kind of surprise for a while, then gets up just as quick as she did and follows. He steps lively until he matches her stride, and before long they are upstairs in her bedroom. He has been there before, a good few times, usually for scientific tests. This time the experiment is completely different. She closes the door behind them before prancing around the room for a bit, arranging some things and dimming the lights. Anon sits on the bed and watches her. She is not only extraordinarily perky, she is wearing the most adorable outfit. A thick, clingy sweater that sits slick against her tight body, long enough to just cover her behind. He guesses she is wearing some manner of practical, yet sexy underwear, like hot pants, or perhaps even some kind of regular cut. The thoughts fuel a whole myriad of different thoughts. If she is comfortable around him like that, what will the next few moments be like? His train of thought is interrupted as she walks over to stand before him. Guide me through it. How did it start? Anon looks dumbstruck for a moment. He goes through things in his mind, lots of it all to contemplate, lots of too whys and how fors. No. Twilight Sparkle is already on the move. She slinks into the bed with surprising agility and lies down, her big purple eyes fixed on him while she simultaneously still scribbling notes. He blinks slowly in a hazy surprise before gathering enough of his mind to grasp the situation. Well, I was sleeping. He slowly settles into the bed beside her and takes a deep breath. She watches his every little move, be it important or not. As he lays staring at the ceiling, he continues. She woke me by crawling into the bed. She wasn't wearing much. He looks to the side as he instantly feels Twilight Sparkle shuffle about. She has sat up and is already pulling her sweater off. He swallows hard as she reveals herself with a smile, lacy white bra barely containing what is clearly her mother's genetics, and a pair of tiny short shorts that were hidden by the length of her sweater. She notices him dead-eye staring and gives him a quizzical look. "Aren't you going to undress as well?" Anon swallows again and nods while doing whatever he can to fidget out of his pants without taking his eyes off her. Sure, this entire situation is strange and awkward, but by all things good, it is hot. She gives him a long look as he pulls off his shirt. He may not think highly of himself, but she seems to like what she sees. Almost the same reaction as her mother. He is a bit baffled with how entranced she is. She attempts to get out of her own pants for a moment, then stands up to do it. He lays on his side and watches her every movement. She undresses slowly and scans around the room as if tossing her clothes in the right spot would give more accurate data. He watches in breathless silence as she unwittingly shows off her legs and delicious flank before unclasping her bra. She measures things for a moment, then, when seemingly satisfied with the placement of discarded garments, turns to him. She holds her bust with one arm and quickly grasps the edge of the blanket with her free hand. "So, you beneath, she on top." Anon has little to add as she pretty much tackles him down into the bed. She sweeps the blanket over them both and makes herself comfortable on top. Their eyes meet. Her glee is fearsome. He has a hard time in more ways than one. He has to try to command the situation, but it is all a bit awkward, especially with the purple glowing scribbling of a quill. "Oh my," she speaks as she shifts a bit on top of him, slipping off a bit to his side, apparently to get better access to that which made her react to begin with. She runs a hand over the solid bulge in his underwear. Anon breathes in deep and gathers himself. "That's a part of cuddling, right?" Twilight looks up to him with a stern look for a moment. "It can be. Was it that kind of cuddling you had with Mom?" She has lost her cheerful demeanor, but her hand remains gently touching his genitals. He swallows hard. What is the right answer here? Ah, to hell's with it. He decides on the truth. "Yes." Twilight's expression remains serious for a moment as she seems to mill over something in her head. Then, while her expression softens, she sighs deeply. She's so lucky. It was an entirely undiscovered discovery. You don't get many chances like that, you know. Twilight looks to the side and sighs again. Anon reaches up to touch her arm. She slowly returns her gaze to him. He gives her a warm, if not a bit awkward, smile. "I could show you through it and add some things? There are plenty of stuff humans do that did not happen with your mom." He trails off while watching Twilight's expression shine up again. She takes a few more notes, dotting every line very thoroughly. She then lets her notepad hover off to the side a bit while she observes Anon closely. "I'd like that very much, Anon." She leans in a little closer and puts a hand on his chest. He smiles for her and reaches up to touch her face. Let's go step by step. We start with kissing. She's about to answer him when he hoists himself up and instantly dives in. He presses his lips against hers and she lets out a surprised little sound before closing her eyes and answering his kiss. They fumble around a bit but eventually find fitting motions. Anon is a fair kisser and Twilight has at least read a few books on the subject. They press lips for a good long while. Anon is completely spellbound and giving Twilight a chance to work up whatever courage she needs to go further. He lets his hands wander over her body, slow, careful. This really is a dream come true for him. He has been wanting her in this position since he first laid eyes on her. Now, with a little twist of fate of her mother getting drunk, this is happening. It is almost like some cheap, silly story. Twilight leans back from their smooching as Anon's hands end up on her behind. She looks a bit surprised. Anon notices. None of them speak for a moment, but as Twilight's quill starts scratching notes again, a light goes up for Anon. So, some things are gonna lead into other things. If you want me to pause and explain something or comment or whatever, just let me know, okay? This elicits a smile from Twilight, and she stops taking notes, at least for the moment. She has a slight blush starting on her face as she gives him her full focus. This is so different from reading a book or, well, I haven't had much practice. Another light goes up for Anon. He didn't really think of it before. Is she a virgin? He kind of assumed she was not. But such a thought does not really change his intentions, perhaps just a way to go about them. He takes another fairly greedy grope of her behind and watches her blush deepen. Just let me know if something doesn't feel right. Other than that, feel free to touch and feel me in any ways you want, for science. Her shy expression cracks into a smile at his terrible joke. She nods for him and reaches up to touch the side of his face with one hand. Anon, please, just touch me too. It's exciting. She leans in to place an awkward kiss on his lips after speaking. He gladly accepts it and takes the opportunity to push it a bit further. Giving her a little lick gets him a response from her tongue as well. The rest comes rather quick. She parts her lips at the same time as he, and their tongues meet in a trying flick. He reluctantly pulls his hands away from her plot, up over her back, giving her wings a careful touch as their kiss deepens. A few bumps of teeth and tongues straying later, they're managing a hot, deep kiss together. He runs his long, rough digits over the ridges of her wings, making her shiver and pant against his face whenever she goes for air from the battle of their tongues. He quickly picks up on where to touch and stroke to get the same effect again. She breaks the kiss completely and looks to the side. A deep breath and a mighty quake of her body later, she peers at him through her eyelashes. How do you know how to handle my wings? I've never felt them so sensitive. Humans don't have wings, do they? Anon blinks for a few moments. He never expected such a reaction from something like touching her wings. Seems that he too has a few things to research in the name of science. No humans with wings. I just improvised. We're touching each other. Twilight lets out a short, adorable giggle. A few quick scribbled notes later, and she lets her focus sway from the research yet again. She places a hand against his chest and gives him a dreamy gaze as he carefully runs his fingers through the feathers of her wings again. It does not take long before she shivers in delight and pants lightly from the treatment. She closes her eyes and murmurs, "Never thought it could feel so. It's almost like master..." She interrupts herself with a gasp and opens her eyes wide. Embarrassing. Wait, why? They're cuddling. This is perfectly normal. She looks to his face, her expression a mix between confusion and something best described as lust. Nobody has touched her like him before. Well, reaching her wings like that herself is something that has eluded her. She recalls her little wing care sessions with Rainbow Dash and how it would tingle and tickle. Those moments did not make her wet and moaning, though. He heard her stray words, but he does not comment. He simply touches her more, giving her wings another good rub down before turning a bit to make her lay on her back. Her wings should or could be in the way, but they fold away rather nicely as she follows his lead. She observes in silence and makes a few notes as he moves as well. Her interest in everything he does remains unwavering. Anon shuffles to the side and stands up on his knees, taking in the beautiful sight of Twilight in her underwear. Enough with touching her non-human bits. What would be next? Her horn? A little bit too phallic for his taste. It is time to give her feminine curves some love. With that, of course, he is already dead set on tasting her hot arousal. Keeping eye contact with her, he scoots down the bed. His hands caress her breasts briefly. Their perfect shape and supple softness makes his rock-solid member throb. There's nothing about her body that isn't just absolute perfection. She notices his expression and instantly takes notes. Human males like breasts, not unlike equestrian stallions. She is pulled out of a brief contemplative state as he lets his hands glide off her breasts and down her soft stomach. He caresses her, feels her up, and continues downward. She watches with wide eyes as he comes to a stop by her panties. She gasps lightly as he hooks his fingers in her underwear and begins to pull at them. This just got real. Well, realer. Anon peels the small piece of clothing down her legs and follows along in the motion. As her underwear is removed, he begins his ascent back up between her legs. He prowls upwards slowly and places soft kisses as he goes. She writhes a bit under his touch and cannot help but to giggle as he reaches her inner thighs with his wet little marks. She observes breathlessly as he approaches her exposed sex. She is practically trembling and a deep blush rides her face. He smiles sweetly for her before diving in. He starts with kissing the top of her marehood, gently pressing his lips against her plump labia. She tenses and softens, winces and takes ragged breaths as he explores her with his lips. When satisfied with the outside of her smooth privates, he gives her a long lick in between her folds. Letting his tongue rest on top for just a second, he casts a glance to take in the enticing vision of Twilight Sparkle completely at his mercy. She has given up taking notes, her chest heaves with heavy breaths, and she is more or less staring at him. He looks down and tastes her again. She is soaked with warm juices. He licks her again and again, dipping his tongue into her time and time again with very satisfying results. She moans a bit louder every time. Her hands wander as if she was restless. She has no idea where to place them. Something goes up for her. She slowly begins caressing her own body, almost as if exploring it for the first time. She raises her arms and draws her fingers through her mane before crooking her back and letting her fingers dance down her neck. He notices her movement and answers with a few rapid licks. She, in return, answers with a brain-meltingly cute sound of pleasure. His fingers press into the soft flesh of her pleasantly rounded hips as he happily laps away at her marehood. She cups her hands around her bust, making her breasts appear even bigger thanks to her small hands. Anon is very enthusiastic and by all means good at what he's doing. Twilight is tingling all over. She has never felt like this before. She is shivering and shaking, a hot explosion in her nethers and her mind alike. She reaches down with a trembling hand to put it on the top of his head. With her touch, he stops his slippery enjoyment and raises his head. Their eyes meet. Her blush has faded a little, but is still present. It mingles with an expression of soft shock. He keeps eye contact with her as he starts crawling up over the bed again, this time on all fours over her. He kisses her belly button while running his hands up over her sides and onto her breasts. He squeezes while hoisting himself up to come face to face with her. She swallows. Anon, she falls quiet with a deep, choppy breath. Her eyes are still focused on his with an intense stare. She reads like an open book. She is ready for whatever comes next. Anon gives each of her nipples a wet kiss, then reluctantly moves his hands from her body to hold himself up. She remains quiet and lets the fingers of one of her hands trickle up his arm. He closes his eyes for a short moment, gathering himself. When he opens them, he speaks. I'm gonna put... He falls silent as she places a single finger against his lips. She keeps the eye contact for a moment, then looks to the side while whispering. Don't have to talk about it. Just go ahead. She locks eyes with him again. She looks determined, even though a deep blush and very hushed whispering. I want you to be my first... Her voice trails off. Her eyes flit back and forth over his face, practically sparkling. Anon hovers above her in silence for a little while. Just before getting too awkward, he smiles and leans in to kiss her. They let their tongues dance as Anon frees his member from its cloth prison. He rubs it up against her, and she has to break their kiss to gasp and moan. He rather skillfully positions himself in a way that is comfortable for them both. He nudges his tip against her soaked labia, lubricating it with her juices. He kisses her as he enters, pushing a good bit of his manhood into her before breaking the kiss to let her moan. Twilight takes his kiss with a certain hunger. Her entire body tenses up as he pushes into her. She lets out a wince, muffled by their kiss. Finally, as their kiss breaks, she breathes in with a gasping tone and then moans loudly. "Oh, it feels I'm so full, so hot." Anon is in complete bliss. Her voice, her words, her body under his, and her beautiful face looking up at him. He pulls back, but not out, and gives her another thrust, a little deeper. She closes her eyes and whines in a pleasant manner. He hovers over her and takes in the sight as he begins moving. He is fairly confident in his skill, and he knows his size is satisfying, at least for human girls. Whatever doubts spooking around in his head is soon swept away by the cute little sounds Twilight makes as he takes her again and again. She moves with him, twists under him, and makes a sweet cacophony of noises. Her eyes remain closed for quite a while. When she opens them, she looks directly into his and forms her moan into an adorable smile. He watches her fight with herself mentally for a brief moment, the magic-fueled quill rattling about for a bit before dropping limp on the bed. She flings her arms up around his neck to pull him down into a kiss. Apparently the ongoing scientific research is put on ice for now. She matches his strokes, strangely skillful. Her kiss is awkward, but her body moves in sync with his. Is she really a beginner at this? Could a book have taught her such a thing? Do ponies have sex ed in school? Things flash through his mind, intrusive, unnecessary thoughts. The touch of her soft lips mount a good defense to combat the roiling in his head. Yet, he has to scold himself mentally. He did just recently come inside of her mother, and he has endured little to no ill effect for it. On the opposite, this very situation is based on the previous mistake. What does it matter if she is or was a virgin? What does it matter what she said? Before he manages to ruin the moment for himself, Twilight distracts him with her tongue. He gladly lets her take the lead and makes a mental note to never ponder just about anything during sex again. Well, to some point. If the future holds more equestrian interactions, he will have to figure out what goes and what does not. Experienced or not, Twilight seems quite taken with his steady rhythm. Even in this position, and with the considerable amount of gentle touches Anon is using, Twilight is glowing hot and ready to explode. Perhaps the tension of the past weeks has rooted deep within her and is first now getting any kind of release. She is getting some now, human manhood filling her up time and time again. Anon is panting along with her now, his body feeling the strain that his mind has been exerting lately. What did he imagine as he thought about this moment? What did he hope for? What did he get? By all the powers that be, getting this kind of attention from two lovely ladies would send anyone's head spinning. Anon never even imagined such a thing. The mother and daughter aspect on top of it just makes it so much more, well, insane. The very thought of what happened along with what is currently going on has Anon shivering with every stroke he gives Twilight. His mind comes together a bit as he feels her fingers caress the side of his face. He pushes deep into her and stops. Twilight peers up at him through half-closed eyes, her lips hanging slack, slightly parted. Her soft, round bust heaves with deep breaths. She touches his face again, this time with her other hand, as she speaks with a breathy whisper. "Everything all right, Anon?" She shuffles a bit under him, rolling her hips and biting her lip at the sensation it gives her. She exhales a shuddering breath while he blinks at her, dumbfounded. Why wouldn't he be all right? Oh, right, the extremely obvious look of concern on his face. He changes his expression, letting a lazy smile crawl onto his face. "Everything is perfect. You are perfect." She bursts out in a short, awkward giggle and averts her eyes to the side, blush returning to her face. He swallows hard. Too cheesy? Didn't just his entire endeavor go over the top, due to him? He attempts his best to keep together as she slowly turns back to look at him. She also seems to gather herself, then speaks in a hushed, sultry tone. "You're so sweet, Anon. I'm happy that you're my first human." Anon's jaw hangs open. What? Wait, no. That didn't matter, did it? He stops himself from cursing out loud. He is so confused, and he knows exactly why. He assumed. To assume is to be disappointed, or proven wrong. Or both. He blinks rapidly a few times and desperately tries to look less like the blank-minded fool he is. She observes him closely for a moment, confusion spreading across her face again. He spots it. Have to diffuse the situation, have to say something to soothe her wondering. I hope it's been informative." Anon hears the words slipping out of his mouth. Dunce, how would that ever... His thought is interrupted by her voice. "You make it sound like the experiment is over." Anon involuntarily puts on an even dumber expression. It isn't? He is about to answer, just as she continues. "Because I would very much like to figure out a few things more." Anon nods slowly a few times, then moves. He slips out of her. Strange enough, he remained inside of her for the time it took to figure things out. He seems rather taken with their little experiment, and he needs to clear his mind up. He tips over to the side and falls down into the bed beside her. His body is stiff from being held up and not moving. She observes him for whatever he is to do next, quill in a wild scribble yet again. He stretches a little and settles in close to her, propping himself up on one arm and laying the other across her chest. I could never say anything other than I'd love to help. I mean, you are interrupted again, this time by a different source. Both of the occupants of the bed look up as the door to the room opens. Twilight Velvet manages a few swift steps into the room while speaking. "I couldn't find you downstairs. I figured you were here. I brought some She stops dead in her tracks and falls silent. The things on the tray she is carrying clink against each other as her grip weakens for a second. She manages to right herself just before anything falls. Twilight Sparkle scrambles in absolute panic to cover herself, or them, or just about whatever. Half a blanket to cover her partially and nothing for Anon. Twilight Velvet swallows hard and keeps her eyes off them. Sweetie, I'll come back later." Twilight Sparkle sits straight up, and Anon is soundlessly pushed to the side. She seems to have turned straight around from panic and just puts on a big smile for her mother. Was she expecting someone else? How does any of this make sense? Anon is thrust right back onto the afterburner as Twilight Sparkle yet again commands a change of situation. "No, Mom, please, come over here. You'd be invaluable to complete my data." Twilight Velvet stands dumbstruck, while Twilight Sparkle looks down to a wide-eyed Anon. "I thought you would appreciate a few more tests with the original subject." And that is that. I'm actually writing a third chapter, because obviously there's going to be a fucking threesome. I'm about halfway through, so give me 6 to 8 months. Yeah.